She didn't cry out. That was the thing that broke him. Jack Turner had seen injured animals drag themselves to his porch before a coyote with a broken leg, once a stray dog with an arrow still lodged in its side. They always made noise. They always fought against the dying. But this child, this small ruined child, collapsed against his front steps in the blistering Montana heat, made no sound at all. She just looked up at him with eyes that had already learned not to ask for anything pressed. One raw, trembling hand flat against the wood, and whispered the two words that would rearrange every remaining year of his life. "He's coming." Then she was gone, eyes closed, body surrendered. Before we go any further, if this story is already pulling at your heart, please take a moment right now to subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. Drop a comment below and tell me what city or state you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. Every single comment means the world to me, and your support is what keeps these stories alive. Now let's go back to Jack Turner's porch and find out who left a 12-year-old girl broken in the Montana desert. Jack Turner had not spoken to another human being in 11 days. That was not unusual. Since both of them passed, Margaret and the baby girl, who never got the chance to take her first real breath. Jack had found that silence was the only thing that didn't lie to him. The land didn't lie. The cattle didn't lie. The sun came up, the sun went down. The work got done, and no one expected anything more from him than that. He was 41 years old, and he felt like a man who had already used up whatever portion of living God had allocated to him. So when he heard the sound, not a cry, not a scream, just the faintest scrape of something dragging against the dry earth near his front steps, his first instinct was not alarm. It was irritation. Another animal in trouble. Another thing that needed tending. He pushed open the screen door and stopped. She was maybe 12. Maybe younger. It was hard to tell because whatever had been done to her had taken something from her face that children were supposed to have, that softness, that unfinished quality. Her dress had been white once. Now it was the color of rust and road dust, torn at the shoulder, the hem ragged and dark with dried blood. Her feet were bare, the soles were destroyed, but it was her back that stopped his breath. She was lying half on her side, and he could see it through the tear in her dress, a mark burned into the skin between her shoulder blades. Not an accident, not a brand applied in haste or in darkness. Deliberate, careful even in its cruelty. The letter Vive raised and pink and permanent. Jack stood there for 3 full seconds. He was not a man given to quick emotion anymore. He had packed all of that away after the funeral sealed it up like a trunk no one needed to open. But standing on his own porch looking at a child who had been marked like livestock, he felt something crack open in his chest that he had been careful not to touch for 3 years. He crossed the porch in 2 steps, crouched down beside her, and pressed 2 fingers to the side of her neck. Pulse. Faint, but there. "All right," he said, to no one, to himself, to the girl, to whatever was listening. "All right." He got his arms under her. She weighed almost nothing, and that made it worse somehow, and carried her inside. He laid her on the cot in the back room, the one he'd set up during Margaret's last months, when the stairs became too much for her. He hadn't changed the blankets since. He changed them now. He pumped water from the kitchen and heated it on the stove, and he cleaned the wounds. He could reach the cuts on her arms and shins, the rope burns around both wrists, the raw wreckage of her feet, and he did not let himself think about how those injuries had been made or how long it had taken to make them. He just worked. She didn't wake up for 6 hours. When she did, she didn't scream. She didn't thrash. She opened her eyes, looked straight up at the ceiling of a room she didn't recognize, and went completely still. The way a small animal goes still when it's been caught, waiting to find out what kind of caught it was. "You're safe," Jack said from the chair across the room. He'd been sitting there for 2 hours. "Nobody's getting to you in here." She turned her head and looked at him. Her eyes were gray-green, and there was something in them that was both very old and very young at the same time. "You don't know that," she said. Her voice was steady. That surprised him. "No," he allowed. "But I mean to make it true. What's your name?" A pause, like she was deciding whether her name was something she could afford to give away. "Emma?" she said finally. "Emma Whitaker." Jack kept his face neutral. Whitaker. He knew that name. Everybody in Callow County knew that name. Victor Whitaker owned half the valley and had his hand in the pocket of the other half. He ran cattle, ran lumber, ran the bank that held the mortgages on a dozen family homesteads. He was the kind of man who could ruin you 6 different ways before breakfast and smile all through it. Victor Whitaker's niece, Jack said. Something moved through her expression. Not surprise, not fear exactly, more like recognition. The recognition that even here, even on a stranger's cot at the edge of nowhere, his name had arrived before her. "His brother's daughter," she said. "My father was Thomas Whitaker." "Was." "He died 4 months ago." Her voice didn't change when she said it. That steadiness was starting to frighten Jack more than tears would have. "They said it was his heart." "Was it?" She looked at him for a long moment. "No." Jack leaned forward in the chair, put his elbows on his knees. "How old are you, Emma?" 12. 13 in November. "How long were you walking before you got to my place?" "I don't know. Since before dawn. I left in the dark." She swallowed. "I didn't know whose land this was. I just walked away from the direction I came from." "That took guts." "I was more scared of staying," she said simply. Jack stood up, went to the kitchen, came back with water and a piece of cornbread left over from 2 days ago. He held them out to her. She looked at the food like she didn't entirely trust it, and he understood that too. He set them on the crate beside the cot and went back to his chair. After a moment she reached out and took the water, drank half of it, then slowly she took the cornbread. They sat in silence while she ate. Outside, the last of the day's heat was settling into the ground, and the crickets were starting up, and somewhere far off, a coyote called once and went quiet. "He's going to come looking for me," Emma said. She wasn't asking. She wasn't warning him exactly. It was more like she felt obligated to tell him what he was getting into before he got into it any further. "Let him come," Jack said. She looked at him. "You don't know what he's like." "Tell me." She was quiet for a long time. Jack waited. He was good at waiting. "When my father died," she began at last. "Uncle Victor came to the house the same afternoon, before the body was even cold. He brought a lawyer with him, a man named Carver from Billings. They sat me down at the kitchen table. I was still crying. I couldn't stop crying. And Mr. Carver put papers in front of me and told me to sign." She paused. I asked what they were. Uncle Victor said they were just formalities, estate papers. I said I wanted to read them first. He said there wasn't time. "What did you do?" Jack asked. "I signed them." Her jaw tightened. "I was 12 years old and my father had just died and I didn't understand what I was giving away. I know now. It was everything. The deed to the Whitaker ranch, the deed to the house, the timber rights, all of it. He had me sign it all over to him. And then he told me I'd be staying in the house, that he'd take care of me, that it was what my father would have wanted." A beat of silence. "He said that. Standing in my father's kitchen with my father's body still upstairs, he said that." Jack said nothing. He let her keep going. "The first week wasn't so bad. He stayed mostly in town. The housekeeper, Mrs. Pratt, she was there. She was kind to me. But then one morning she was just gone. Victor said she'd quit. I don't think she quit." Emma looked down at her hands. "After that it was just me and Victor and 2 of his men. Decker and a man who everybody called Cobb. And it stopped being it stopped." "What stopped?" "Being pretend." She said it quietly. "He stopped pretending he was doing me any kindness. He told me I was expensive, that I ate food that cost money and took up space that cost money, and that I needed to start being useful. He put me to work in the kitchens and the stables. If I did something wrong, if I dropped something, if I was too slow, if I looked at him a way he didn't like, he'd—" She stopped. "You don't have to say all of it. Jack said. He burned me, she said. It came out flat and exact, like she had made a decision to say it plainly or not at all. He heated a piece of iron, his initial. He said it was so I'd remember who I belonged to. She reached up and touched the back of her own shoulder, a small, unconscious gesture. I screamed. He told Decker to hold me still. Decker held me still. The coyote called again outside. Jack's hands rested loose on his knees, had slowly closed into fists. He made himself open them. 3 nights ago, Emma continued, I heard him talking to Carver. I was supposed to be asleep. They didn't know I was on the other side of the wall. She looked at Jack directly now, and the old young thing in her eyes was very clear. Carver asked what he was going to do about me when I turned 18. Whether I'd make trouble about the property, whether I'd go to a judge. What did Victor say? He said he'd handle it the same way he handled my father. The room was very quiet. I left that night, Emma said. I waited until Decker was asleep. I took some bread from the kitchen and I walked out the back. I walked all night and all the next day. I hid in a creek bed when I heard horses. I walked again when it got dark. She looked at the remaining piece of cornbread in her hand. I found your porch this morning. Jack stood up. He walked to the window, looked out at the dark yard for a moment, then turned back around. I'm going to ask you something, he said, and I need you to tell me the truth. I'll tell you the truth. Do you have anybody? Any kin? Any family outside the Whitakers? Anybody who knows where you are or would notice you were gone? She thought about it. My father had a sister, Aunt Clara. She lives in Cheyenne, but I haven't seen her in years. I don't know if she even knows Papa died. Is there anyone in Calhoun County who'd speak for you? Who knows what Victor's been doing? The whole county knows what Victor does, Emma said. Her voice had an edge to it now, the first edge he'd heard. Knowing something and doing something about it are different things. Victor owns the bank. He holds mortgages on half the ranches in the valley. The sheriff... She stopped. What about the sheriff? Sheriff Cade plays cards with Victor every Friday night. Jack rubbed the back of his neck. He went to the window again, looked out past the yard into the darkness beyond, where the land stretched out flat and open in every direction. A man could see trouble coming from a long way off out here if he was watching for it. He was watching for it now. You're staying here? He said. He didn't phrase it as an offer. It wasn't an offer. You eat, you rest. You don't go anywhere near the road or the main trail. If anyone comes, you go to the root cellar under the kitchen floor. There's a latch on the inside. You stay there until I come for you. Emma stared at him. Why would you do that? You don't know me. No, Jack said. Victor will come here. He'll bring Decker and Cobb and maybe more. He has legal papers. He'll say I'm his ward. Let him say it. Mr. Turner. Her voice was careful, controlled, too controlled for a 12-year-old. I'm not worth this trouble to you. I don't have anything. I can't pay you. I can't... Emma, Jack said. She stopped. I'm not asking you to pay me anything. He met her eyes. I'm not doing this because of what you're worth. I'm doing it because what was done to you is wrong. And because... He paused, finished it honestly. Because I needed a reason to be worth something again, and I reckon you just gave me one. She looked at him for a long time. Then she looked down at her hands. Okay, she said softly. Okay. Jack went to the kitchen to heat more water and think through what morning was going to bring. He had no illusions. Victor Whitaker was not a man who let things go. He had resources, he had connections, he had the law in his pocket and the town on his payroll. Coming for a runaway girl, his runaway girl, according to the papers Emma had signed, would be the easiest thing in the world for a man like that. But Jack Turner had been empty for 3 years, and he had been a careful, methodical man long before the emptiness came. And now, standing at his kitchen stove in the quiet dark, he found that something he'd thought was completely gone. Some specific kind of attention, some particular readiness had come back to him with an almost physical weight. He was not afraid of Victor Whitaker. He was afraid deeply and specifically afraid of failing another person he was supposed to protect. That fear had its teeth in him and always would. But he understood now, as the water began to steam and the night settled around the cabin, that the answer to that fear was not retreat. It was not silence and solitude and 11 days without speaking to another human being. The answer was to stand in the door and mean what you said. He poured the hot water into a basin and went back to the room where Emma was. She had fallen asleep sitting up, the piece of cornbread still in her hand, her back pressed against the wall, as if even in sleep she needed to know nothing was behind her. He set the basin down quietly. He took the blanket from the end of the cot and drew it over her without waking her. Then he went back to the front door of the cabin, opened it, and stood looking out at the long dark distance toward the road. The night was enormous, and the stars were unreal in their quantity, and the land went on forever in every direction. Somewhere out there, Victor Whitaker was looking for her. Jack Turner folded his arms and waited. He had been many things in his life. A young man with plans, a husband, a father for 9 short hours, a widower, a man who'd stopped counting sunrises for a while there. But he knew, standing in that doorway, with the warm lamplight at his back and a sleeping child on the cot behind him, that whatever he was now was different from all those other versions. Whatever he was now had a direction to it. Now, Emma had whispered, "He's coming," before she passed out on his steps, and she'd meant it as a warning. What she didn't know yet, what Jack himself was only now understanding, was that it was also a beginning. He was still standing in the doorway when the sun came up. Jack hadn't slept. He hadn't tried. He'd made coffee somewhere around 2 in the morning, drank it standing at the kitchen window, and then gone back to the door and stayed there. It wasn't vigilance exactly, or it wasn't only that. It was something older, something that didn't have a clean name. The feeling of a man who has finally found the thing he's supposed to be doing and doesn't want to stop doing it long enough to close his eyes. Emma slept until nearly 7. When she woke, she came to the kitchen doorway and stood there watching him for a moment before she said anything. Her feet were wrapped in the clean linen he'd left beside the cot. She moved carefully, favoring her left side. "You didn't sleep," she said. "I'm fine." "That's not what I asked." He looked at her. She looked back at him without flinching, and he had the sudden sharp sense that this child had spent a long time reading adults. Reading their moods, their patience, their intentions, the way other children read picture books, as a matter of survival. "No," he said. "I didn't sleep. Because of me. Because I was thinking." She came the rest of the way into the kitchen and sat down at the table. He set a cup of coffee in front of her, weak, with a lot of water, the way Margaret used to take it, and then sat across from her. "What were you thinking about?" Emma asked. "Who we can trust in this county," Jack said, "and who we can't." "That's a short list. The first one." "Doc Aldridge," Jack said. "You know him." Emma's expression shifted. "He came to the house once. After Victor—" She touched her shoulder again, that small automatic gesture. "He came to see about my back. Victor let him in. Stood in the room the whole time. Doc Aldridge looked at me, and he looked at Victor, and he didn't say a word about what he saw." She paused. "He looked like he wanted to, but he didn't." "He's got a mortgage at Victor's bank," Jack said. "Everybody's got a mortgage at Victor's bank. That's the problem." Jack wrapped both hands around his cup. "Here's what I know about Henry Aldridge. He's a decent man trapped in a bad position. Those two things aren't the same as a coward. Sometimes a man just needs to know somebody else is willing to go first." Emma considered that. "And you're willing to go first." "I already did," Jack said. "You're sitting in my kitchen." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "What about the telegraph? Could we send word to my Aunt Clara in Cheyenne? Victor controls the telegraph office. The operator on Billings Reed, Victor's cousin by marriage." Emma set her cup down. "So he has the sheriff, the bank, the telegraph, the lawyer. He has legal papers saying I'm his ward." She said all of this without panic, just laying it out the way you'd inventory a bad situation before deciding how to move through it. "What do we have?" Jack looked at her steadily. The truth. The truth, she repeated. Not mockingly, more like she was testing the weight of it, finding it lighter than she'd hoped. "And me," Jack said. "Don't forget me." Something moved through her expression that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite tears. It was something in between, something that didn't have a word for it. She picked her cup back up and drank. They had 20 minutes of quiet after that. It was the last quiet they'd get for a long time. Jack heard the horses before he saw them. 2 riders coming in from the south road, moving fast, not trying to hide it. He was on his feet before the sound fully registered, already crossing to the kitchen. "Root cellar," he said. "Now." Emma didn't argue. She was already moving. The latch on the root cellar trapdoor was stiff. Jack had oiled it twice this spring, and it was still stiff, but Emma got it open and dropped down inside in the time it took the 2 riders to reach the edge of Jack's yard. He lowered the door over her, heard the inside latch click, and straightened up and walked to the front door as if he'd been heading there all along. He opened it before they knocked. 2 men. One was Decker. Jack had seen him in town before, a wide, flat-faced man with pale eyes who worked for Victor and had the look of a man who'd found his calling in cruelty. The other Jack didn't know by name, but he recognized the type. The kind of man who came with somebody like Decker. "Morning," Jack said. Decker didn't bother with pleasantries. "We're looking for a girl, 12 years old, brown hair, gray dress. She wandered off from the Whitaker place 2 days ago. Mr. Whitaker's real worried about her." "Don't know anything about that," Jack said. "We tracked her this direction," Decker said. "Footprints in the dust on the south road, small feet. Came right up this way." "Lot of things come up this way," Jack said. "Coyotes mostly. You're welcome to look around the yard if it'll settle your mind." Decker's pale eyes moved over Jack's face, reading him. "What about inside?" "No," Jack said, pleasantly, completely without give. "Now listen here. You got a warrant," Jack said. "Sheriff Cade signed something I should know about, because if you've got paper, I'll read it. If you don't, you're just 2 men on my land without an invitation, and I'd like you to take yourselves back down that road before I lose my hospitality." Decker's jaw tightened. "Mr. Whitaker's not going to be happy hearing you were uncooperative." "You go ahead and tell him exactly what I said," Jack replied, word for word. The 2 men looked at each other. Then Decker looked back at Jack, and what was in his eyes was not anger exactly. It was a kind of calculation, filing information away. "We'll be back," Decker said. "I know it," Jack said. He watched them ride out. He didn't go back inside until they were completely gone from sight. Then he opened the kitchen floor and helped Emma up. She was shaking. She held it very still, the way she held everything but her hands when she grabbed his forearm to climb out, were trembling. "They'll come back with Victor," she said. "Yes." "And the sheriff?" "Probably." "Then what?" "Then we make sure we're not standing here alone when they do," Jack said. He went to get his coat and his hat. Doc Henry Aldridge lived in town in a small white house behind his office on Callow Creek's main street. Jack had been there exactly once 2 years ago when he'd gotten a fence post through his palm and needed stitches. Aldridge had done good work, quiet and efficient, and he'd charged Jack half what he should have because he said a man living alone with a wound like that had already had a bad enough day. Jack knocked. Aldridge answered almost immediately, already dressed, coffee in hand, like a man who'd been up thinking too. "Turner," Aldridge said. His eyes went past Jack to the horse, then back. "Come in." Jack came in. He didn't sit down. He told Aldridge everything standing in the man's front room in the time it took the doctor to set down his coffee and fold his hands and listen. He described the wounds on Emma's feet and arms. He described the rope burns on her wrists. He described the mark on her back, the raised pink V between her shoulder blades, the way it had been made with intent and held down with Decker's hands. When Jack finished, the room was quiet. "I examined that child 3 months ago," Aldridge said finally. His voice was low and controlled and furious in the way that quiet men get furious. "There were older bruises. I told myself they could have been from a fall. I told myself I wasn't certain." He stopped. "I was certain." "I know," Jack said. I'm not here to blame you. Why are you here? Because Victor's going to come to my place with legal papers, and the sheriff and I need someone who can speak to what was done to Emma from a medical standpoint. Someone the town will listen to. Someone whose word means something. He met Aldridge's eyes. You're the only doctor in 3 counties, Henry. People trust you. People trust Victor's bank to hold their mortgages, Aldridge said. I know what you're risking. Do you? Aldridge stood up, walked to the window, stood with his back to Jack. He'll call in my note, day after if I'm lucky. I've been building this practice for 12 years. I know. Aldridge was quiet for a long moment. Is the girl all right? She's alive and she's eating, Jack said. Whether she's all right is going to depend on what happens next. Aldridge turned around. Something had settled in his face, not peace exactly, but resolution. The look of a man who has found the edge of himself and stepped over it. Let me get my bag, he said. They rode back together, not speaking much. When they got to the cabin, Emma was sitting at the kitchen table with Jack's old Bible open in front of her, not reading it, just resting her hands on the pages, like she needed something solid to touch. She looked up when Aldridge came in and went very still. Emma, Jack said. Doc Aldridge is here to help. He's on our side. Aldridge crouched down to her eye level, a deliberate gesture. Jack noticed the act of a man who knew how to approach someone who'd been hurt. I owe you an apology, young lady, he said. I came to that house, and I saw what I saw, and I didn't say a word. That was wrong of me. I'm sorry. Emma looked at him. Are you going to say something now? I'm going to say a great deal, Aldridge said. I'm going to put it all in writing, signed and dated. Every wound, every mark, every injury consistent with prolonged abuse. And I'm going to stand in front of a judge and say it out loud if I have to. Emma's chin came up. Something shifted behind her eyes. Not trust, not yet, but the beginning of the consideration of trust. Okay, she said quietly. Aldridge examined her carefully and thoroughly, and wrote down everything he found in his neat physician's hand. He had 2 pages by the time he was done. He read them back to Emma, asking her to confirm each one, and she confirmed them all in the same flat, careful voice she used when the subject was things that had been done to her. When it was over, she said, My father, do you think Victor really— I don't know, Aldridge said honestly. But I know what I'm going to find out. There are ways to establish certain things after the fact if we can get to the right people. Carver, Emma said. The lawyer. He was there. He knows everything. Carver's Victor's man, Jack said. He's Victor's man, as long as Victor's protected, Emma said. What happens to Carver if Victor goes down? She looked between the 2 men with those old young eyes. Lawyers don't go to prison with their clients if they have something to trade. Both men looked at her. I'm 12, she said. I'm not stupid. No, Jack said. You are definitely not stupid. It was Aldridge who spotted the dust cloud on the south road. He'd stepped outside for a moment and came back in fast. His voice changed. Company coming, he said. More than 2 this time. Jack went to the door. He counted 5 horses. He could make out Decker in front, and beside him a heavy-set man in a gray coat that he recognized even at this distance. Victor Whitaker. Beside Victor rode a man with a badge catching the sunlight. Sheriff Cade. And behind them 2 more men Jack didn't know, 5 to 2, or 5 to 3 if you counted Emma, which nobody was going to. Emma, Jack said without turning from the door. Root cellar. No, Emma said. He turned then. She was on her feet, her hands at her sides, her chin level. Emma? No, she said again. Her voice was shaking, but her eyes weren't. I'm done hiding under floors. If Victor walks onto this property, I want him to see me standing up. Jack looked at her for a long, still moment. Then he looked at Aldridge. Aldridge picked up his bag and set it on the table. I'm staying right here, he said. Jack turned back to the door. Then let's see what he's got to say, he said. Victor Whitaker had the kind of face that worked hard at being trustworthy. He was not old, mid-50s maybe, with silver at his temples and a well-made coat, and the careful smile of a man who'd practiced looking reasonable in mirrors. He dismounted in Jack's yard with the ease of a man who considered himself welcome everywhere he went. Sheriff Cade stayed on his horse. Decker stayed on his horse. The other two men, whoever they were, stayed on their horses. Only Victor walked forward. "Jack Turner," he said, pleasant as Sunday morning. "I don't believe we've been formally introduced. Victor Whitaker." Jack didn't take the offered hand. "I know who you are." Victor lowered his hand without any visible embarrassment. "Then you know I'm just a worried uncle looking for his niece. The girl is my legal ward, Mr. Turner. I have a judge's order right here." He reached into his coat, produced a folded document. "Affirming that Emma Whitaker is in my legal custody and must be returned to my care immediately. I'd hate for this to become an unpleasant situation." "She's not here," Jack said. Victor's smile didn't change. "Now, Jack, Decker tells me he tracked her footprints right up to your door, and I see Doc Aldridge's horse tied up right there. So let's not—" "I'm here because I was called to treat injuries," Aldridge said from behind Jack. His voice was steady. "Injuries to a child consistent with months of physical abuse. Injuries I intend to report in a formal written statement to a territorial judge." For the first time, something flickered in Victor Whitaker's expression. Something behind the smile that was not friendly at all. "Henry," he said, and the pleasantness in his voice had thinned. "You should think very carefully about what you're involving yourself in." "I have thought carefully," Aldridge said. "I should have thought carefully 3 months ago." Victor looked at Jack, then past Jack into the doorway of the cabin, and for a moment his eyes went still. Because Emma had come to stand in that doorway, wrapped in Jack's spare jacket feet in bandages, chin up, eyes clear and gray-green, and entirely without fear. Or not without fear, Jack would understand later that she was more afraid in that moment than she'd ever been in her life. She just had something bigger than the fear. She had already decided not to let it win. Victor looked at her for a long moment. His jaw moved. Then he looked at Sheriff Cade. "Tom," he said, "do your job." Cade finally dismounted. He was a big man. Sheriff Tom Cade, running to fat now, but still carrying the posture of someone who'd once been capable of violence and hadn't entirely forgotten how. He walked up to stand beside Victor and looked at Jack with the weary authority of a man who'd rather not be here, but had made too many choices over too many Friday nights to be anywhere else. "Mr. Turner," Cade said, "I'm going to need you to step aside." "No," Jack said. Simply, without heat. Cade's eyes narrowed. "That's obstruction. You come onto my property without a warrant to remove a child," Jack said. "A child with documented injuries from the man standing next to you, and you call it law. I call it something different." He held Cade's gaze. "And when this goes in front of a judge, a real judge, not one of Victor's, I want you to think about which side of this you want your name written down on." The silence stretched long enough to hear the horses shifting their weight. Victor's voice came out quiet and final, the pleasantness completely gone. "You have no idea what you're starting," he said to Jack. "I will take everything you have. This land, that cattle, every nail in that cabin. I will leave you with nothing." Jack Turner looked at Victor Whitaker across the distance of his own front yard, with Emma standing in the doorway behind him, and Aldridge standing at his back, and he felt the most extraordinary thing, a complete and total absence of dread. As if the worst had already happened to him once, and he had survived it, and everything after that was just arithmetic. "Then you better get started," Jack said, "because I'm not moving." Victor stared at him. Then he looked at Emma one more time. Emma didn't look away. Victor turned and walked back to his horse. Cade followed his shoulders tight with something that might have been shame. Decker lingered a moment longer than the others, those pale eyes moving over Jack with the patient attention of a man making mental notes. Then they were all gone. Jack stood in the yard until the dust settled. Then he turned around. Emma was still in the doorway, and her hands were gripping the doorframe, and she was shaking visibly now, all the stillness that had held her upright through that confrontation finally coming apart. "You okay?" Jack said. No, Emma said. Her voice broke on the word. Just that one word, and then she got it back. But I think I'm going to be. Jack nodded. He walked back to the porch past her and into the kitchen. Sit down, he said. I'll make more coffee. We've got planning to do. Because Victor Whitaker hadn't given up. Any man who knew him understood that. He'd simply gone to find a bigger weapon, and the question was whether Jack Turner could move fast enough and far enough, and speak to enough of the right people before that weapon came back around. The answer to that question was going to determine everything. The planning took most of the afternoon. Aldridge stayed. He sat at Jack's kitchen table with his 2 pages of medical notes spread out in front of him, and a 3rd page he was still writing, and he didn't speak much, but his presence had a steadying quality, the way a good man's presence usually does. Jack moved around the cabin, checking things, thinking out loud in short sentences. Emma sat across from Aldridge and listened to everything, and said very little, but her eyes tracked every word. We need to get ahead of Victor, Jack said. Right now he thinks he has time. He came here to make a show of force and it didn't work, and he's gone back to regroup. That gives us a window. How wide a window? Aldridge asked. Narrow. He'll go to Cade tonight. Cade'll tell him he needs more paper before he can move on a man's property. Victor'll go to his judge, probably Harlan Porter in Billings. He's had Porter in his pocket for years and get something stronger. That takes at least a day, maybe 2 if Porter's out of town. Jack stopped. We use those 2 days. For what? Emma said. For telling the truth before Victor gets to tell his version of it. Jack looked at her. There's a town meeting every 2nd Thursday. That's tomorrow night. Callow Creek puts them in the church hall open to any landowner in the county. Victor goes every time because he runs them near enough, but any citizen can speak. Emma went still. You want me to speak? I want people to see you, Jack said. I want them to hear you in your own words, because right now, Victor is the only voice they've got. He's going to tell the county you're a troubled girl, a runaway that you've made up stories. He's going to say I kidnapped you. He's going to say Henry here has gone soft in the head. Jack sat down. The only thing that beats a man like that is the truth delivered in public where there are witnesses before he can shape the story. Emma thought about it. She was quiet for so long that Jack started to think she was going to say no. Then she said, Will anyone listen? Some will. Jack said, Some won't. But once you've said it in front of 40 people, it can't be unsaid. Victor can pressure 1 man. He can pressure 10. He can't silence a whole room. He'll try, Emma said. Let him try. She looked down at the table, then up. Okay, she said. I'll do it. Aldridge set down his pen. He looked at both of them. I'll be there, he said. I'll stand up when she stands up, and I'll read every word of what I've written. That'll cost you, Jack said quietly. I know what it'll cost me, Aldridge said. He picked his pen back up. I've been paying a different price for 3 months. I find I prefer this one. That night, after Aldridge rode back to town, and Emma had fallen asleep again deeply. This time the exhausted sleep of someone whose body was finally starting to believe it was safe. Jack sat at the table alone and thought about what they were walking into. The town meeting was not going to be clean. Victor would be there. Cade would be there. Half the room would owe Victor money or favors or both, and the other half would be afraid of the first half. Jack had lived in Callow Creek for 6 years, and he'd kept himself apart from most of it, and he understood that his standing in that room was modest at best. But Emma was going to stand up in front of those people, and he was going to stand beside her, and Aldridge was going to read his report, and the truth was going to be in the room, whether people wanted it there or not. He went to bed just before midnight and slept 4 hours, and woke up and started the day. Emma was already awake when he got to the kitchen. She'd made coffee badly, but with real effort, and she had a look on her face he hadn't seen before. Not fear, not that careful flatness she used as armor. Something more forward-leaning than either of those things. I've been thinking, she said, sliding a cup toward him. About what? About Carver. She wrapped her hands around her own cup. The lawyer. I told you I thought he'd trade information if Victor was in real trouble. But there's something I didn't tell you yesterday. Something I remembered last night." Jack sat down. "Tell me now." "The night I heard them talking through the wall. Victor and Carver. I didn't only hear what Victor said about handling me the way he handled my father." She paused. "I heard Carver push back. He said he hadn't signed on for that. He said what happened with Thomas with my father had kept him awake for months. He said he wanted out." Emma looked at Jack directly. "Victor told him he was in too deep to want out. That if Carver talked, he'd take him down too. That they were the same." "So Carver's afraid of Victor," Jack said. "Carver's afraid of Victor," Emma said. "But he's also guilty, and he knows it. And if Victor goes down anyway," she let it hang. "Carver might prefer to be the one who helped put him there," Jack said slowly. "Reduced culpability. Maybe immunity if he goes to the right people first." "He lives on Oak Street," Emma said. "Above his office." Jack looked at her. "How do you know that?" "I paid attention," she said simply. "Victor always told me I was stupid. I paid very close attention to everything." Jack drank his bad coffee and thought about it. Going to Carver was a risk. The man could shut the door, send word to Victor, have them both in a bad position before the meeting tonight. But if Carver came to that meeting, if Carver stood up, the whole equation changed. "I'll go this morning," Jack said. "You stay here." "I want to come." "Emma." "If Carver sees me," she said, "he can't pretend I'm an abstraction. He can't think of me as a problem to be managed. I'm a person who got hurt. I'll sit across from him and let him look at my face and my hands, and he'll have to decide what kind of man he is with me right there in the room." Jack stared at her for a moment. Then he pushed his chair back and stood up. "Get your shoes on," he said. Edmund Carver was a thin, nervous man with ink-stained fingers and the look of someone who'd been expecting bad news for a long time. He opened his office door, saw Jack Turner, and started to close it again. Then he saw Emma standing just behind Jack's shoulder, and he stopped. His face did something complicated. "Mr. Carver," Jack said, "we need 5 minutes." Carver let them in. He didn't sit. He stood behind his desk like it was a fortification and looked at Emma with an expression that was equal parts guilt and panic and something that might have been grief if you were being charitable. "I can't help you," he said immediately. "I want you to understand that. Whatever you're here to ask." "Emma told me about the night she heard you," Jack said. "What you said to Victor. That you wanted out. That it had kept you awake." Carver's jaw tightened. "I don't know what she thinks she heard." "Mr. Carver," Emma said. He looked at her. She let him look. She stood with her hands at her sides and her chin level, and she met his eyes without blinking. "I'm 13 years old," she said. "I have rope burns on my wrists and a brand on my back, and my father is dead. You sat at our kitchen table the day he died. You put papers in front of me and told me to sign them. I was crying, and I couldn't see straight, and I signed them because I was a child, and I trusted that adults weren't going to do what you were doing to me." She paused. "I'm not asking you to be a good man. I think it might be too late for that. I'm asking you to do one good thing before this is over. For my father, if not for me." The room was very quiet. Carver sat down, hard like his legs gave out. He put his hands flat on the desk and stared at them. "Victor will destroy me," he said. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Victor is going to be destroyed," Jack said. "The question is whether you're standing next to him when it happens or standing on the other side of the room." Carver pressed his eyes closed, opened them. "What do you want?" "Come to the town meeting tonight," Jack said. "Bring the original documents, the ones Emma signed, and tell the truth about how they were obtained. That's perjury against my own client. It's testimony against a man who murdered his brother," Jack said flatly, "and has been torturing a child for 4 months. You can call it what you want." Another long silence. Emma didn't move. She kept her eyes on Carver's face, patient as stone. Finally, Carver said, "If I do this, if I come tonight and I say what I know." He looked up. "Will someone protect me after—" "I'll do everything I can," Jack said. It wasn't a large promise. Carver knew it. But he looked at Emma one more time, at her wrists and her face, and the careful way she held herself, and something in him made a decision. "7 o'clock, he said. "I'll be there." They rode back in the kind of silence that's full rather than empty. Emma sat straight on the horse Jack had saddled for her, and he could see her processing, not celebrating, not yet, but organizing. Building the shape of what was coming. "Tonight's going to be bad," Jack said. Not a warning, just honesty. "I know," Emma said. "Victor's going to come at you hard. He's going to try to make you cry, or make you angry, or make you look like a child who can't be believed." "I know what he'll do," Emma said. "I've watched him do it to other people. When he starts in on you, you look at me. Don't look at him." She turned her head. "Why at you?" "Because I believe you," Jack said. "And sometimes that's all a person needs to keep standing. One face in the room that believes them." Emma held his gaze for a moment. Then she turned back to the road. "Okay," she said softly. The church hall was full by 6:30. Jack had not expected that. He'd expected a third of the usual turnout, the people who came to every meeting, the committed and the board. Instead, there were people standing along the back wall. Farmers and shopkeepers, and women who didn't usually come to these things, and ranch hands who'd ridden in from outlying properties. Word had traveled fast in the way that words travel in small communities when they carry enough weight. Jack walked in with Emma on his left and Aldridge on his right, and felt the whole room notice them all at once. The noise didn't stop, but it changed. The quality of it shifted. Victor was already there, seated in the front row, like a man who owned the furniture, which he largely did. Cade stood against the side wall in his official capacity, thumbs in his belt, not looking at anyone directly. Decker was near the back. And beside Victor, looking like a man attending his own funeral, sat Edmund Carver. He'd come. Jack felt something loosen in his chest. The meeting was called to order by Reg Tomlin, who ran the feed store and chaired the meetings with the distracted energy of a man who'd rather be somewhere else. He read through the usual business quickly, his eyes flicking to Jack and Emma, and then away again. And then he said there was a matter that had come to community attention, and opened the floor. Victor stood before Tomlin had finished the sentence. "I'll keep this brief," Victor said, and his voice was warm and carrying, and full of the practiced ease of a man who'd spoken to crowds his whole life. "There's been a misunderstanding regarding my niece Emma. She's a troubled girl, she has been since her father's passing. God rest his soul, and she ran away 3 days ago in what I can only describe as a confused state. She has unfortunately been taken in by a man who doesn't understand her condition, and who has, I believe with good intentions, been misled by the stories of a frightened child." He turned and looked at Jack with an expression of perfect weaponized concern. "I bear Mr. Turner no ill will. I simply want my niece safe and home." A murmur through the room. The murmur of people who wanted to believe the simpler story because the simpler story was less frightening. Jack put his hand lightly on Emma's shoulder. She was rigid under his hand, but she didn't move. Then Aldridge stood up. "I'd like to respond to that," he said. The murmur shifted. Aldridge had authority in this room. He'd delivered half the children in it. He'd sat with the dying parents of half the adults. He read from his report, every injury, every measurement, every medical finding. He read it in his clear physician's voice without drama, without editorializing, and the facts were dramatic enough without help. Rope burns consistent with restraint over an extended period. Burn scarring consistent with deliberate branding. Malnutrition. Multiple healed fractures in 2 fingers of the left hand, consistent with having been broken and left untreated. That last one, the fingers hit the room differently than the others. Jack heard a woman in the 3rd row make a sound that she quickly swallowed. Victor said, "Henry, this is—" "I'm not finished," Aldridge said. He kept reading. When he sat down, the room was the quietest Jack had ever heard a room full of people be. Then Emma stood up. Jack stood with her. He didn't say anything. He just stood. She looked out at this room. 40-some faces looking back at her, some hard, some frightened, some already broken open by what Aldridge had read. She found Jack's face and held it for exactly 1 second, and then she turned to the room. "My father was Thomas Whitaker," she said. "He died 4 months ago. I was told it was his heart. My uncle told me that." She paused. "My uncle also told me that if I caused trouble about the property, he would handle me the same way he handled my father. I heard him say that through a wall. And I want everyone in this room to understand what that means, because I think you all know what kind of man Victor Whitaker is, and I think you've known for a long time, and I think you've been afraid to say so." The room erupted. Not in anger at Emma, in that complicated, volatile way a room erupts when a truth has been said that too many people were holding in. People talking to each other, not at her, voices raised. Victor on his feet trying to project above it. "She's a child," Victor started. "She's my client's daughter," Carver said. And the room went dead silent again. Victor turned and looked at Carver with an expression that Jack would never forget for the rest of his life. Not surprise, not betrayal. Pure cold calculation followed immediately by fury, followed immediately by the mask slamming back down. All of it in under 2 seconds. "Edmund," Victor said softly. "Don't." Carver was shaking. His hands on his document case were visibly unsteady. But he stood up and he didn't sit back down. "My name is Edmund Carver," he said to the room. "I'm an attorney. I was hired by Victor Whitaker approximately 1 year ago. In that capacity, I was present on the day of Thomas Whitaker's death, and I witnessed the obtaining of signatures from this minor child on documents transferring the entirety of the Whitaker estate into Victor's name." He swallowed. "Those signatures were obtained under duress, without legal representation for the child, and without full disclosure of the document's content. They are legally invalid." He paused. "I should have said so 4 months ago. I am saying so now." Victor took 1 step toward Carver. It was 1 step too many. "Sit down, Victor." The voice came from the middle of the room. A farmer named Walt Greer, who had a mortgage at Victor's bank, and 3 kids and a wife who'd been brought through a difficult birth by Henry Aldridge 8 years ago. He said it again quietly, the way a man says something he's been wanting to say for a long time. "Sit down." Another voice. "Let the girl speak." Then another, and another. Victor looked around the room. He looked at Cade, who was looking at the floor. He looked at Decker, who was near the back door, and who Jack noticed had been moving incrementally closer to that door for the last 4 minutes. Victor sat down. Not in defeat. Men like Victor Whitaker didn't have the capacity for defeat in a moment it had to be extracted over time, but with the particular stillness of a man who is recalculating. Emma turned back to the room and kept talking. She talked for 8 minutes. She told them everything: the kitchen table and the papers, and the housekeeper who disappeared, and the 2 men who were always there, and the iron that was heated in the fireplace and held to her back while Decker held her still. She said it all in the same flat, careful voice, and she did not cry once, and somehow the not crying was more devastating than tears would have been. Tears could be dismissed. That steady, exhausted precision could not. When she finished, the room was still. Then Walt Greer stood up and said, "I think we need to talk about getting the territorial marshal involved." And that was the moment Jack knew. Not that they had won. It was too early and too complicated for that word, but that something had changed in that room, changed in the county, changed in the calculus of what Victor Whitaker could and couldn't do anymore. The silence of 40 people who'd been afraid had broken open, and what was underneath it was anger and grief, and the particular shame of people who recognized in themselves a long cowardice they were now ready to put down. Victor stood up. He straightened his coat. He looked at Emma with those flat, calculating eyes, and then he looked at Jack, and what was in his face was not the pleasant mask or the fury. It was something colder and more focused than either. "This isn't over," he said, quietly enough that only the first 2 rows heard it. "No," Jack said. "It's not." Victor walked out. Cade followed. Decker was already gone. Emma's hand found Jack's arm in the noise and movement of the room, breaking into conversation. People standing, people reaching for her Walt Greer crossing to shake Jack's hand. Her grip was tight, and she didn't say anything. Jack put his other hand over hers. "You did good," he said. She didn't respond right away. She was looking at the door Victor had walked through, and her face had the expression of someone who has done a hard thing and is waiting to see if it was enough. It wasn't over. They both knew that. Victor still had resources and connections and lawyers beyond Carver, and a territorial judge in his pocket, and a cold fury that didn't dissolve in town meetings. Whatever was coming next was going to be harder in some ways than what had already passed. But the room was full of people who had heard the truth tonight and chosen to stand on its side. And that was something Victor Whitaker had not counted on and could not buy back. Jack held Emma's hand on his arm and waited for the storm's next shape. Victor Whitaker moved fast, faster than Jack had given him credit for, which was a mistake Jack filed away immediately and would not make again. By the time Jack and Emma got back to the cabin that night, there was already a notice nailed to his fence post. Jack pulled it off, read it by lamplight on the porch. It was a legal order signed by Judge Harlan Porter in Billings, directing that Emma Rose Whitaker be returned immediately to the custody of her legal guardian, Victor Whitaker, and that any individual harboring said minor was in contempt of a territorial court order and subject to arrest. Jack had underestimated the width of the window. Victor hadn't waited 2 days. He'd ridden straight from the church hall to the telegraph office, his cousin by marriage, and had the order in Porter's hands before the meeting was even over. Emma read the notice over his shoulder. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "He's going to come in the morning." "Yes." "With Cade and the order and probably more men than last time." "Yes. And this time it's a judge's signature." She folded her arms. "Jack, can you fight a judge's order?" "Not alone," Jack said. "But we're not alone anymore." He was already thinking about Walt Greer, about the 3 other men who'd stood up in that room tonight, whose names he now knew and whose faces he'd matched to them. About Aldridge, who'd ridden home with the kind of quiet determination of a man who'd finally picked a side and was done second-guessing it. He went inside and wrote 4 notes, short, plain, specific. He told each man what was coming in the morning and what he was asking for. Not for violence, he was clear about that. He wanted witnesses. He wanted bodies in his yard when Victor arrived, enough of them that whatever happened would be seen and remembered and reported. He rode to 3 of the 4 properties himself in the dark, leaving Emma in the cabin with the door latched and the root cellar option open. The 4th note he left with a boy he found sleeping in Aldridge's stable, with a coin and instructions to deliver it at first light. He got back to the cabin at 2 in the morning. Emma was awake, sitting at the table with his Bible again. She'd been reading it this time. He could tell because it was open to a different page than he'd left it. "You should sleep," he said. "I know," she said. "I keep thinking about my father." Jack sat down across from her. He didn't say anything. He just sat. "He was a good man," Emma said. "People always say that when someone dies, even when it's not true, but he actually was. He was patient, and he was fair, and he never once raised his hand to me." She turned a page she wasn't reading. "I keep thinking about the last morning, before he got sick. We had breakfast, and he told me there was a foal born in the east pasture and asked if I wanted to name her. I said Daisy. He said that was a fine name." She paused. That was the last normal thing. Daisy the foal and breakfast, and my father at the table. And then Victor came and everything went wrong, and I never got to... She stopped. Her jaw worked. She pressed her lips together and held whatever was behind them in by sheer force. "Emma," Jack said quietly. She looked at him. "You're going to grieve your father properly," he said. "When this is done, when you're safe, and the truth is on the record, and Victor is where he belongs. You're going to have time and space to do that, I promise you." She looked at him for a long time. "You promise a lot of things," she said, "for a man who can't control most of them." "I know," Jack said. "I keep making them anyway." Something shifted in her expression. Not the almost smile from before, something quieter than that. Something that was almost trust, the real kind, the kind that costs something to give. "Okay," she said. "Okay." She closed the Bible. "I'll try to sleep." He was still at the table when the sun came up. Walt Greer arrived first at 6 in the morning with his 2 oldest sons, and a look on his face that was calm and set and completely without drama. He tied his horse at the fence and walked up to Jack's porch and said, "Who else is coming?" "Aldridge, possibly 3 others." "What about the marshal? Anyone send word to the territorial office?" "Carver said he'd file a formal complaint last night," Jack said. "Whether it gets there before Victor gets here is another question." "It won't," Greer said flatly. "Victor knows that too. Whatever he's planning to do it before the marshal can respond." "I know." Greer nodded once, like that confirmed something he'd expected. He turned to his sons, both of them broad-shouldered young men with their father's steady eyes, and said, "You 2 stay by the fence. You don't touch anyone. You watch and you remember everything you see." He turned back to Jack. "They won't be as easy to discount as a child and a doctor and a rancher they can call a fool." Aldridge arrived at 6:30 with Edmund Carver beside him, and that surprised Jack enough that he didn't speak for a full 3 seconds. Carver looked terrible. He hadn't slept clearly, and the guilt and fear on his face had hardened overnight into something more angular and decided. He got off his horse with the careful movements of a man whose joints ached, and he carried his leather document case against his chest like armor. "I filed the formal complaint last night," Carver said before Jack could ask. "By telegraph to Helena, addressed to the Territorial Marshal's office. I signed my name to it." He paused. "I also sent copies of the original estate documents, the ones Emma signed, to 2 newspapers, one in Billings, one in Helena." Jack stared at him. "When did you do that?" "While Victor was still in the meeting hall trying to salvage the situation," Carver said. "I've been his lawyer for a year. I know how fast he moves. The only way to stay ahead of him is to move first." He glanced toward the cabin. "Is she all right?" "She's inside," Jack said. "Good." Carver set his document case on the porch railing and opened it. "When they get here, I want it on the record in front of every witness present that the guardian order obtained from Judge Porter was secured without disclosure of the medical findings documented by Dr. Aldridge and without disclosure of the circumstances under which the estate documents were signed. I can make an argument that the order is procedurally invalid on those grounds. It won't hold forever, but it'll hold long enough." "Long enough for what?" Greer asked. "Long enough for the marshal to get here," Carver said. "If he moves on this, if he takes it seriously." "He will," said a voice from behind them. They all turned. The man standing at the edge of the yard was not someone any of them recognized. He was maybe 50, lean and weathered, wearing a long coat that had seen hard use and a badge on his chest that was not the Calhoun County Sheriff's badge. Behind him were 2 other men similarly dressed, similarly badged, holding their horses and watching the road. He tipped his hat. "Deputy Marshal Everett Cross, out of Helena. I was already in Billings on another matter when the telegram came in." He looked at Jack. "You'd be Turner." "I would," Jack said. "And the girl's here." "She's inside." Cross nodded. He had the quiet authority of a man who'd spent 20 years sorting out other people's disasters and had seen most of the ways they could go. "Here's where we are," he said. "I've reviewed the complaint filed by Mr. Carver. I've also reviewed the order obtained from Judge Porter, and I've got significant concerns about how that order was obtained. Until those concerns are resolved by my office, that order is in suspension." He paused. "Which means, if Victor Whitaker shows up here this morning to execute it, he's going to have a problem." The yard was very quiet for a moment. Then Walt Greer said, "Well," and smiled for the first time since Jack had known him. They didn't have to wait long. Victor came at 8, and this time he brought 7 men. Decker was there, and Cade and 5 others who were hired weight and nothing more. Victor himself rode in front, still in his gray coat, still with that face carefully set to reasonable. He came to the gate, saw the number of people in Jack's yard, and his eyes moved across them one by one, taking inventory, and Jack watched him adjust internally when he got to Cross and the two deputies. He adjusted. But he came forward anyway. "Deputy Marshal," Victor said. He kept his voice easy. "I wasn't aware you had business in Callow County." "I do now," Cross said. "Mr. Whitaker, I need to inform you that the guardian order you obtained from Judge Porter is under review pending an investigation into the circumstances of its procurement. It is suspended effective this morning. You may not execute it until the investigation concludes." Victor's jaw moved. "On whose authority?" "The Territorial Marshal's office. My authority." Cross said it without heat, the way a man states a simple fact. "Additionally, I have a warrant for your detention for questioning in connection with a complaint filed yesterday evening. The complaint relates to the death of Thomas Whitaker and to allegations of child abuse regarding Emma Whitaker." He reached into his coat and produced the document. "I'm going to need you to come with me." The yard went absolutely still. Victor looked at the warrant. He looked at Cross. He looked at Jack, and what was in his eyes was the coldest thing Jack had ever seen in a human face. Not rage, not fear, but calculation. Taken all the way down to its zero, a man deciding in real time whether the move he was considering was possible. Decker's hand moved toward his belt. "Don't," Cross said. He hadn't looked at Decker. He was still looking at Victor. But both his deputies had shifted their weight forward, and the instruction was clear enough. Decker's hand stopped. "Tom," Victor said to Cade. His voice was completely controlled. "You're the law in this county." Cade looked at the ground. He looked at Cross. He looked at Emma, who had come to stand in the cabin doorway again, because of course she had. Then he looked at Victor. "Victor," he said, and his voice was tired in the way of a man who has been tired for a long time and is finally putting something down. "I can't help you with this one." The silence that followed lasted 3 full seconds. Then Victor said quietly, just to Cade, but everyone heard it, "You will regret that." "Maybe," Cade said, "but I reckon I'd regret the other thing more." Victor looked at Cross. He looked at the warrant. He looked around the yard one more time at Greer and his sons at Aldridge at Carver, with his document case at Jack standing solid on his porch at Emma in the doorway. He dismounted. Emma made a sound. Just a small sound barely audible, a breath released after being held for a very long time. Jack heard it from 20 feet away, and it said everything that words couldn't. Cross took Victor into custody without drama and without violence, which was somehow more devastating to witness than a struggle would have been. Victor went with his hands at his sides and his face absolutely composed, as if dignity was the only thing left to him, and he was going to hold it with both hands all the way down. Decker and the hired men scattered within minutes, melting back toward the road, the way men like that always do when the architecture of their protection falls away. Cade stood in the yard for a long moment after. Then he walked to the porch, removed his badge, and held it out to Cross. "I've got a letter of resignation to write," he said. "I'd be grateful if you'd give me an hour before you decide what to do with me." Cross looked at him. "You cooperate fully with the investigation," he said. "Everything you know about Victor's operations, every Friday night conversation, every order you carried out, all of it." "Yes," Cade said. "All of it." Cross took the badge. "You've got your hour." Jack watched Cade walk to his horse and stand there with his hand on the saddle horn and his head down, and he felt no satisfaction about it, only the tired, complicated sorrow of watching a man reckon with what he'd made of himself. It was not a clean feeling. None of this was clean. Emma came off the porch and crossed the yard and stood in front of Jack. She looked up at him and he looked down at her. And the morning was warm and the yard was full of people, and somewhere in the distance a bird was calling in the way birds do indifferently, which was almost funny. "Is it over?" she asked. "The worst of it," Jack said. "There'll be hearings, testimony. Carver'll have to stand up in front of a judge and say everything he told us. Aldridge, too. It won't be fast. But Victor is going to face what he did," Jack said. "To your father and to you. Cross is good at his job. He'll build what needs to be built." Emma looked toward the road where Victor had gone. Her expression was not triumphant, not relieved exactly. It was the expression of someone looking at a long distance they've crossed and trying to understand how they got from there to here. "I want to go home," she said. "To the ranch. My father's ranch." She turned back to Jack. "I know it's complicated with the legal documents. I know it might take time, but I want to go back. I want to take care of it the way my father would have." "We'll get it back," Jack said. "Carver says the documents are invalid. With him testifying and Cross involved, it's a matter of time. Will you—" She stopped, started again. "When it's ready. When the legal part is done and the ranch is mine again. Will you help me? I don't know how to run a ranch. I know some of it. My father taught me what he could, but I don't know all of it." Jack looked at her for a moment. "You're asking me to stay on," he said. "I'm asking you to not go away," Emma said. It was a careful distinction, and she meant it that way. "You don't have to leave your place. I don't want to do this alone." Jack thought about his cabin and his cattle, and 11 days of silence, and the feeling he'd had standing at the door with nothing behind him worth protecting. He thought about the morning Emma had appeared on his steps and changed the math of his life without asking permission. "No," he said. "You're not going to do it alone." Aldridge came to stand beside them, his bag in hand, looking like a man who'd walked through something difficult and was surprised to find himself still standing. "I'll need to go back to town," he said. "I have patience, and I imagine there's going to be a fair amount of conversation about the events of the last 2 days." He looked at Jack. "Victor's going to have friends who are angry, people who lose when he loses. You need to be careful." "I know." "The girls at the church are already talking," Greer said, walking over. He had his hat in his hands, and was turning it in that way of men who have feelings they're not entirely sure what to do with. "Margaret Pratt, the housekeeper, Victor said quit. She's been living with her daughter in town. 3 people have already told me she's been wanting to talk for months but was scared. She'll talk now." Emma looked up at that. "Mrs. Pratt." "That's right." Emma's face did something complicated. "She was kind to me," she said quietly. "She used to leave extra biscuits on my tray. She never said why. She just did it." "People find the ways they can," Greer said, "until they find a bigger way." He set his hat back on his head, shook Jack's hand, nodded to Emma, with a gravity that was the closest thing to a bow that a Montana rancher could manage, and walked to his horse with his sons behind him. The yard emptied slowly. Cross and his deputies took the road south. Carver rode out, looking like a man who'd been lightened of something heavy and wasn't yet sure if he'd miss it. Aldridge gave Emma a brief, awkward pat on the shoulder, the gesture of a man who didn't know if he'd earned the right to comfort her yet, and rode after Carver. By 9 in the morning, it was just Jack and Emma in the yard. The sun was fully up, and the air had that particular quality of a summer morning that has decided to be decent despite everything. Emma tilted her head back and looked up at the sky with her eyes half closed. "My father used to say that the land doesn't care about your troubles," she said. "That you can have the worst day of your life, and the grass still grows, and the sky is still blue, and the cattle still need water." She lowered her head. "I thought that was a sad thing when he said it. Now I think it's something else." "What do you think it is now?" Jack asked. "Honest," she said. "I think it's honest." She looked at him. "We should go inside. You haven't eaten." "Neither have you." "I know," she said. "I was thinking I could try to make breakfast, better than the coffee." Jack looked at her. "That's not a high bar." "I know," Emma said, and it was the closest thing to a laugh that had come out of her since she'd appeared on his steps 4 days ago. Not quite a laugh, more like the shape one would take if she gave it a little more room. They went inside, and for the first time in what felt like a very long time, the cabin felt like something more than a place to wait for morning. The breakfast Emma made was not good. The eggs were too dry, and the biscuits were dense enough to use as a doorstop, and she knew it before Jack said a word, because she'd watched his face as he chewed his first bite and saw him make the decision to eat it anyway without complaint. "It's terrible," she said. "It's hot," Jack said diplomatically. "That's the only thing it has going for it. That's more than nothing." She ate her terrible eggs and he ate his, and they didn't talk much, and it was the most ordinary morning Jack Turner had experienced in 3 years. He kept waiting for the ordinariness to feel strange. It didn't. It felt like something returning. After breakfast, Emma washed the dishes without being asked. She stood at the basin with her back to him, her bandaged feet careful on the floorboards, and she said without turning around, "What happens now? Today, I mean, what do we actually do?" "We wait for Cross to send word," Jack said. "We stay close to the property. Victor's in custody, but he's got money for lawyers, and he'll be working on bail before noon. Until the marshal's investigation is formally opened and the judge order is fully suspended, we don't take chances." "And the ranch, my father's ranch." Carver filed the complaint. "The estate documents will be part of the territorial court review. It won't happen this week, but it'll happen." Emma set a plate in the drying rack. "I want to see Mrs. Pratt," she said. "You said Walt Greer told you she's been wanting to talk. I want to talk to her too. She was there, she saw things, and she—" Emma stopped. "She was kind to me when nobody else was. I'd like her to know I remember that." "When it's safe to go to town," Jack said. "When will that be?" "Give it a few days. Let Cross establish himself. Let Victor's network figure out which way the wind is blowing before we walk into the middle of it." Emma turned around. She had a dish towel in her hands and she was looking at Jack with the expression she got when she was deciding whether to push back on something. "You're very careful," she said. "I try to be." "My father was careful too," she said, "and Victor still got to him." The words landed quietly. Jack held her gaze. "I know," he said. "Being careful isn't the same as being safe. But it's what we've got." She turned back to the dishes. "Okay," she said. "A few days." Those few days were harder than either of them expected in ways neither of them had anticipated. It wasn't external danger that made those days difficult. It was the silence. The waiting. The way time slows down after an emergency when the adrenaline has burned itself out and the body is left with nothing but the weight of everything that happened. Emma moved through the cabin carefully, quietly, and Jack gave her space and watched her and understood that what was happening in her was a reckoning she had to do mostly alone. On the second day, she asked Jack about Margaret, his wife. She asked simply directly the way she asked everything, no softening preamble, no apology for the question. "What was she like?" Jack was at the table cleaning his rifle, and he set it down and thought about how to answer honestly. "She was stubborn," he said. "Not in a hard way. In a rooted way, like a tree that doesn't move in the wind because the roots go deep enough. She laughed at things I didn't find funny. She was a better judge of people than I ever was." He paused. "She would have known what to do with you from the first minute. She wouldn't have needed time to figure it out." "What do you mean?" "I mean, she had a gift for seeing people clearly," Jack said. "For knowing what they needed without having to work at it." He picked his rifle back up. "I have to work at it." Emma was quiet for a moment. Then, "You seem to be managing." Jack looked at her. She wasn't smiling exactly, but there was a quality to her expression that was almost dry, almost wry, the very edge of humor. It was the most normal thing he'd seen from her. "I'm getting practice," he said. On the third day, Walt Greer came by with news. Victor Whitaker had posted bail in Billings. The amount was high, which meant Cross was serious. But Victor had the resources, and he'd made it out. He was back in Calhoun County, under conditions he was not to contact Emma, not to approach Jack's property, not to interfere with the marshal's investigation. "He's not going to sit still," Greer said. "He's already talking to people in town, telling his version, saying Cross overreached, saying Carver acted out of personal grievance." "Is anyone listening?" Jack asked. "Some," Greer said honestly. "He still holds mortgages. People are scared. But the feeling in town has shifted. The meeting the other night, He shook his head. Things were said that can't be unsaid. People are watching which way their neighbors go. It matters to them. Mrs. Pratt, Emma said from the doorway. She'd been listening. Has she talked to Cross? She talked to him yesterday for 2 hours, Greer said. Her daughter was with her. She corroborated everything about the housekeeper situation, how Victor dismissed her and threatened her into silence. And she told Cross what she'd seen in that house in the weeks before and after Thomas Whitaker's death. He paused. She's a brave woman. She was shaking the whole time apparently, but she didn't stop talking. Emma closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, they were bright but dry. I want to write her a letter, she said. Can someone get it to her? I'll take it myself, Greer said. She wrote it that evening at Jack's table in a careful hand, 2 pages. Jack didn't ask what was in it. It wasn't his to know. But he saw her face when she folded it and sealed it, and it was the face of someone who had put something real and irreplaceable into an envelope and was trusting it to travel safely. It was on the 5th day that the twist came, and it came in the form of a rider from Helena. Jack was in the yard when the man arrived, young official carrying a leather satchel that had the territorial seal on the clasp. He asked for Jack Turner, confirmed he'd found him, and handed over 2 envelopes. The first was from Deputy Marshal Cross. The investigation had been formally opened. Judge Porter in Billings was himself under review. 2 other cases had surfaced in which orders had been obtained through what Cross's letter described as irregular communications involving financial consideration. Porter's orders, including the guardian order for Emma, were suspended pending investigation. The territorial court in Helena had appointed an independent judge for the Whitaker matter. Jack read that twice. Then he read the second envelope. It was from a law office in Cheyenne, from the attorney representing Clara Whitaker, Thomas Whitaker's sister. Emma's Aunt Clara. She had received word of what had happened. She had not in fact known that her brother was dead. Victor had deliberately withheld the information, and she had arrived in Helena 3 days ago to engage the territorial court directly. She was petitioning for information about her niece's welfare and wished if Emma was willing to make contact. Jack stood in the yard with both letters and understood that the world had just changed shape again. He went inside. Emma was at the table with a piece of rope she'd been practicing. Knots on. Jack had shown her 2 of them 2 days ago, and she'd been working at them with the focused persistence she brought to everything. He set the letters in front of her. She read them. He watched her face as she did. When she got to the second one, something happened that Jack hadn't seen yet. Not the almost smile, not the careful flatness, not the terrible brittle steadiness she wore like armor. Her face simply opened, like a hand unclenching. Like a door that had been sealed so long, the opening of it was shocking. She didn't know, Emma said. Her voice was unsteady for the first time. She didn't know he was dead. She wasn't ignoring me. She didn't know. No, Jack said. Victor made sure of that. Emma pressed both hands flat on the letters. She breathed in through her nose once slow. I have to write to her. Yes. I don't know what to say. Start with the truth, Jack said. You're good at that. She looked up at him. Her eyes were wet, finally fully, the tears she'd been holding back since she crawled onto his porch landing without permission, and taking her face with them, and she didn't try to stop them this time. She just let them come. Jack went and got her a glass of water and set it beside her and sat across the table and let her cry. He didn't try to fix it or minimize it or talk her through it. He just stayed, which was the most useful thing he knew how to do. After a while, she wiped her face with her sleeve and picked up a pen. The letter to Clara Whitaker took her 3 hours and 4 drafts. When it was done, she read the final version aloud to Jack, not asking for his approval, just wanting to hear it out loud to make sure it said what she meant. It said everything. Thomas Whitaker and the breakfast table, and Daisy the foal, and the kitchen with the papers, and what Victor had done and how it had ended, and where Emma was now, and what she hoped for. The last line was, I don't know what happens next, but I would very much like to know you. Jack handed it back to her. Send it, he said. 3 weeks later, Victor Whitaker was indicted on 4 counts by the territorial court in Helena: procurement of property through fraud, child abuse, unlawful detention, and 1 count, the one that had taken Cross and his team the full 3 weeks to build, of murder in the first degree in the death of Thomas Whitaker. Aldridge had been right. Certain things could be established after the fact with the right expertise and the right authority. Cross had brought a physician from Helena who'd examined the original records of Thomas Whitaker's illness and death, and who'd found what Aldridge had suspected and hadn't had the standing to prove. Carver had filled in the rest. Every detail of every conversation, every document, every arrangement. He'd talked for 2 full days in front of the independent judge, and his voice had gotten steadier, as he went the way a man's voice steadies when he finally stops carrying something that was too heavy for him. Decker was arrested in Wyoming, trying to cross into Colorado with a stolen horse, and very little else. The other man, the one Emma had only ever known as Cobb, turned himself in to Cross's office, voluntarily made a full statement, and was given reduced charges in exchange. He wept during the statement, Cross later told Jack. That information didn't change anything, but Jack filed it away anyway. Even the men who did the worst things were sometimes somewhere something more than the worst things they did. The day Emma went back to the Whitaker Ranch for the first time was a Tuesday in late September. Jack drove her in the wagon. The morning was clear and cold in the way of early autumn mornings that are warning you about winter without quite committing to it yet. Emma sat beside him without speaking for most of the ride, and Jack drove without pushing her. When the main house came into view, she went still. "Stop for a minute," she said. He stopped the wagon. She looked at the house for a long time. It was the same house, same wood, same roof, same porch, with the 2 chairs her father had put there years ago. But it was also entirely different in the way places are different when you've been away from them through something terrible. The geography is the same. The weight of it has changed. "He planted those trees," Emma said. She was looking at something to the right of the house. "My father. He planted them the year I was born. He said he wanted me to have shade when I was old enough to sit outside and read." Jack didn't say anything. "I'm going to take care of them," Emma said. "The trees and the house and the cattle and all of it. The way he would have." She turned to Jack. "Will you come inside with me the first time?" "Yes," Jack said. They went in together. The house had been locked and sealed since Victor's arrest. It smelled of dust and absence. Emma walked through each room slowly, and Jack walked behind her and let her set the pace. She stopped in the kitchen for a long time, her hand on the back of the chair where her father had sat. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Then she straightened up and looked around and said, "I'm going to need help, a lot of it. The ranch has been neglected. The cattle need assessing. The equipment." "Emma," she stopped. "One thing at a time," Jack said gently. She looked at him. Then she let out a breath and nodded. "One thing at a time," she said. Clara Whitaker arrived in Callow Creek on a Thursday in October, and Emma met her at the stage. Jack stayed by the wagon to give them space. He watched from a distance as a woman of about 40, slim and dark-haired and travel-worn, stepped down from the stage and looked around the street with the careful eyes of someone arriving in a place they'd only heard about in letters. And then she saw Emma standing a few feet away, and her face did the same thing Emma's face had done when she read the letter from Cheyenne, that unclenching that opening. They stood about 4 feet apart for a moment, these 2 people who were connected by blood and grief, and years of Victor Whitaker's deliberate interference. Then Clara stepped forward and put her arms around her niece, and Emma, who had held herself together with such extraordinary precision for so long, let herself be held. Jack looked away. He looked at the road and the town and the sky and gave them all the privacy the open street would allow. Victor Whitaker went to trial in January. Emma testified. She sat in the witness chair in the Helena Territorial Courthouse, and she answered every question put to her with the same precise, unstoppable honesty she'd brought to the town meeting 4 months earlier. She was 13 years old, and she was the most composed person in the room, and the jury watched her and believed every word she said because there was no other reasonable thing to do. Carver testified. Aldridge testified. Mrs. Pratt testified. Cross presented the case with the methodical care of a man who'd made sure every nail was in before he built the roof. Clara Whitaker sat in the gallery every day of the trial and did not look away. Jack sat beside Clara in the gallery. He hadn't planned to be in Helena for the trial. He had a ranch to run, and Emma had told him he didn't need to come. He'd come anyway. On the last day before the jury went out, Emma found him in the hallway outside the courtroom. She looked at him for a moment, and he saw all of it in her face. The fear she'd earned by being afraid of the right things, the exhaustion of months of fighting, and underneath all of it, something that had been growing slowly in the months since a terrible morning in Montana, when she'd crawled to a stranger's door and whispered, "He's coming." Something that looked, Jack thought, like the beginning of a life, rather than the survival of one. "Whatever they decide," Emma said, "I want you to know that I'm all right. Not because of the verdict. Because—" She paused, working for the words. "Because I know who I am now. I know what I come from. My father was a good man, and this was done to him and to me, and it was wrong, and I said so in front of a judge and a jury, and I told the truth, and I didn't break." She looked at Jack steadily. "I didn't break." "No," Jack said. "You didn't. That's mine," she said. "Whatever they decide today, that's mine, and nobody can take it." Jack nodded. He didn't say anything because there was nothing to add to that. The jury was out for 4 hours, guilty on all 4 counts. Victor Whitaker was sentenced to life imprisonment by the independent judge, who said in his remarks that the crimes represented not a single act of cruelty, but a sustained campaign against the most vulnerable person in a man's care, and that the court had no mechanism strong enough to address that fully, but that it would use every mechanism it had. Emma stood very still when the verdict was read. She didn't cheer, didn't cry, didn't look at Victor. She looked at the wall above the judge's head and breathed slowly and let the words settle through her: guilty, guilty, guilty. And then she looked at Jack and gave him the smallest nod. He nodded back. In the years that followed, the Whitaker Ranch became something different from what it had been under either Thomas or Victor's stewardship. Emma ran it with the methodical fairness of someone who had learned exactly what the misuse of power looked like and had no interest in replicating it. She paid decent wages and kept her word, and treated the people who worked for her as people, and the ranch prospered quietly in the way that honest operations tend to prosper, without drama, without shortcuts, without anyone getting hurt along the way. Clara stayed in Calhoun County. She bought the small house on the edge of town that had belonged to the former schoolteacher, and she ran the school herself, and she and Emma had dinner together every Sunday without fail. Aldridge kept his practice. Victor's bank was taken over by a cooperative of county landowners, and the mortgages were restructured, and Henry Aldridge's note was among the first settled. He never mentioned it directly, but he did leave a jar of good honey on Jack's porch every Christmas, without a card, which was close enough. Jack kept his cabin. He rode over to the Whitaker Ranch 2 or 3 times a week to help with what needed helping, and Emma came to his place when she wanted the particular quiet of a place that had no history attached to it. They had a standing arrangement for Sunday morning coffee that had started informally and become over years the most reliable appointment either of them kept. One evening when Emma was 16, she asked him something she'd never asked before. "Do you think about Margaret still?" "Every day," Jack said without hesitating. "Not the same way I used to. It used to be like an open wound. Now it's more like a scar you've had long enough that you know exactly where it is, and you don't run into things with it anymore." He looked at her. "Why, I think about my father every day too," she said. "I was worried that meant I wasn't getting better, but then I realized the thinking isn't the problem. It's how you think." She folded her hands around her coffee cup. "I think about him, and I'm sad. But I'm also glad. I'm glad he was my father. I'm glad he planted those trees. I'm glad he named a full daisy with me." She looked up. "That's different from how it used to feel." "Yes," Jack said. "That's different." She looked at him with her gray-green eyes. Those eyes that had been old and young at the same time since the first moment he'd seen them and said "Pa." It was the first time she'd said it. Just like that, simply, as if it had always been the word, and she'd just been waiting to be sure. Jack set his coffee down. He looked at this girl who had crawled to his door with nothing and become somehow the person he'd been waiting to be useful to the person who had given his empty hands something worth holding. "Yeah," he said. His voice was rougher than he intended. "Yeah, that's right." She smiled, really smiled, the full, unguarded version that she'd earned through everything it had taken to get here. And Jack Turner, who had spent 3 years believing that the best of his life was already behind him, understood in that moment with absolute certainty that he had been wrong. Some things end, some things are taken, some things break you down to the foundation and leave you standing in the wreckage wondering what you're supposed to build next. But if you stay, if you stand in the door and mean what you say and refuse to move when it matters, sometimes the answer walks up to your porch on destroyed feet and changes everything. Emma Whitaker had needed someone who would not leave. Jack Turner had needed someone worth staying for. And in the long, honest years that followed, with the land stretching out around them, and the work always waiting, and the coffee always on, and the Sunday mornings steady as sunrise, that was exactly what they were to each other. Family is not who shares your blood. Family is who stays. And they stayed, both of them, every single day. That was enough. That was everything. That was the whole truth of it, and it did not need another word.
Capcom. Okay, nice. Hell yeah. A lot of clips. Hell yeah. So one thing I love is Star Trek, and Guinan's name is from the sci-fi show Star Trek: The Next Generation. It's one of my favorite characters, played by Whoopi Goldberg on TNG. It's the same show that has Sir Patrick Stewart as Picard and all of those fun characters. Hi. And baby girl. I know she's out of frame, y'all. But hi, baby girl. What you doing? Oh my goodness, that was a good yawn. Hi. She's doing her contortion with her face. I know. Look at the socks. The toe beans. Hey, honey. Yes. Good girl. Or we do have an ad starting soon-ish, y'all. Just heads up. There's food over there for you, baby girl. You can go eat it. She can't decide what she wants to do. What's going on? What are you doing? Oh my goodness. Hi. She's trying to figure out what she wants to do. Anything comes of it? Yeah. Well, hopefully nothing comes of it. Hopefully it's all good.